Hello, nice to see you, Sue. Hi, Haley.
I'm doing okay.
Hello, everybody. Good. Welcome to the Pure Soul Ask Nikki. It's nice to see you guys. So I was praying just now, trying to figure out how to begin our Zoom, and I don't really have any ideas because what's really stuck in my head, and even though I didn't watch the video again, I was trying to remember, like, what did I talk about? And the more that I was thinking about that, I do remember. And there was one of the in the first part of the video, which was Heaven Whispers, is these three instances where I felt like we got a glimpse of heaven. Like, what is that like? And the one that keeps sticking in my head, excuse me, the one that keeps sticking in my head is the one that referred me to a time that I had an experience with my grandmother after she was in heaven. And she took me to this place and said, fill your slot with like whatever you want. And so I started to put all these things in my slot, and these things that I wouldn't expect I would put in my slot, but that's what my soul was putting in my slot. And so, excuse me. Excuse me. So one of the questions that I was asking you guys is, what would you put in your slot? Like, when you think about that, what things or people or experiences, and what did that make you think of? If you feel comfortable sharing that, because that was huge for me after I had that reading, and it brought me back to that time that I had that experience so many years earlier. Sorry about that. Go ahead, Britt.
So I was rewatching the video, and I've been thinking a lot about my cat, Jack, who died in September. And I knew from the video. So in the video, you talk about these like ceramic cats that Nana made and gave them to you. And then those were in your slot. You were like surprised that those were in your slot. And I remember from a session you and I had that one of those cats was supposed to be like for Jack, who was my actual cat in life, and he passed in September. So I was thinking of him as I was watching the video. And then I thought, well, obviously Jack is in the slot. And then in my mind, I saw him running towards me with like a crinkle ball, because we used to play fetch all the time. And he brought me this little like crinkle ball. And it kind of made me laugh because it made me think of these like little moments that you mentioned in the video of things that you wouldn't expect to be in your slot, like this little side table or this little tchotchke, or like a little thing that represented moments of joy and represented moments of heaven on earth. And then it was like a totally unexpected thing. You would have never consciously put that in your slot. So that was kind of my experience, that like Jack brought me this little crinkle ball of like, if I'm in your slot, then I'm bringing this ball, because we used to just play fetch all the time. He was the weirdest cat, and that I thought that was kind of cute, that was what was in my slot.
That's awesome. Thank you. Anybody else want to share what was in your slot? Hi, Marissa. Meet everybody. Everybody meet Marissa. Nice to see you.
I'll share some of so after watching that video, and it's still been stuck in my mind, there's two things that I had as a kid. One was this like Little Mermaid backpack. It was like this big. And I remember going, I think it was like Garden Party Outlet, it was called, in Roselle. And my grandparents were watching us, and we went there to buy like candy and just like walk around, and I lost it. And I think it had like $8 and some change, but like to me, that was the world. And I saw that was in the slot, because even I had randomly brought it up months ago. I was like, oh, just like I lost that Little Mermaid backpack. My dad's like, Haley, it's time to move on. Like, it's time to get over it. Like, because I remember like searching for it, calling, like looking online later in life if they had this like little thing. So that was there. And then also my entire family, we all had like a baby blanket made for us. And I hated my baby blanket. I never used it, but I had this like gigantic, it was probably like the size of a full bed Mickey Mouse blanket that had these like patches. And I was like, it got so shriveled up like a baby blanket, but it was like massive. And I brought it like everywhere. Like I would go to the beach with it. I would like, and I don't even remember what necessarily, it probably just wore out, but I was like, that was there like full intact, because by the end it was like so faded. Like the red was like, just like not fire engine red anymore. So like those two things were there. I was like, lovely. I'll get you back.
Isn't it interesting? Like it surprises you. Like you see, these are things that even like when we're younger and in our childhood, we think we lost something.
Yeah.
Or we think we're missing something. And then we realize that really, truly, we're not missing anything. We lack nothing. We have everything that we want. And I think that's what a lot of people refer to when they talk about that quantum reality, that someplace this is actually a true experience for you. And I feel like when my grandma brought me to that experience and I started to see that, I recognized that the things that I put there were things that filled my soul. So even if it was this little crazy accent table or your mermaid backpack, like it's something that, I don't know, it brings me to my real self or something like that. And so it's interesting that both you and Brittany had that type of experience where it came up and you're like, wow, I would put that in my slot. But it arose, it like came to you. And then we can pick other things with our conscious mind that we want to put in our slot from our own brains. But I feel like when the question is asked, something just comes and you're like, oh, wow, I wouldn't have expected that. Anybody else feel like they want to share what happened when they watched it?
So the first thing that comes to mind for me is when I was about 12 years old, I bought like the $70 safe with my babysitting money, I think it was. And I put all my treasures in it, and I made sure that my safe was waterproof and fireproof. Don't ask me why it had to be both of those things. Like I felt like if my house ever burned down, I would always have my treasures. And a few of the things that I kept in there were like my grandma's perfume that she gave me, and a bracelet that it was a Disney bracelet that I took with me to visit my grandparents every time we went. And I made my grandma kiss it every time before I went home. So I always like had a piece of her with me, and that always stayed in my safe. But the first thing I thought of was my little safe.
Wow, that's awesome. Thank you. Anybody else?
Mine would be the boat I had years ago when all the kids were growing up. It would be my red Sea Ray, because of all what it meant with watching the kids grow up and all the good and happy times, which revolved around just the family thing.
Awesome. Thank you.
I had a red boat too.
Oh, that's cool.
In fact, my husband and I were just talking about that. As we walk the dogs, we talk about lots of things. And he said, man, that was the best red boat. It was actually my first husband, Tom, who bought it. It was a outboard motorboat, a speedboat. And we used to take the kids tubing. And well, after Tom died like the year he got the boat. But anyway, so my husband Mark and I have a lot of memories with pulling the kids. He's like, we should get a boat again. I'm like, yeah, but it's got to be just like the red boat, you know. But you know, when I watched the video, I didn't really have anything to put in my slot. I was like, I don't know, maybe I'm just not really attached to too many material things, or maybe I don't know, wasn't in the moment to really absorb and think about that. But and then I heard the red boat, and I'm like, oh my gosh, yes. When my husband and I walk the dogs, we talk about things. So my red boat would have to be in the slot too.
And I think walking your dogs with your husband is also in your slot.
Maybe, yeah. Well, see, now I was thinking more things like physical material things. And I felt like saying, I got nothing in my flat, you know, but there's so many times spent together, things like camping with my daughter and things like that. Those things,
Yeah.
probably lots of those in my slot, I suppose, or at least
Yeah.
a handful that are really, really awesome. So,
Yeah, and I think that sometimes we just have those types of inclinations. Of course, those are going to go with us because of the emotions, but sometimes our emotions are attached to a thing, like the bracelet that Amanda has that her grandmother kissed. So it's not really the bracelet. It represented what that feeling was. So it's just a physical representation of that inner. That's what they're all about. I put a $8 accent table in my in my slot because my mom
yeah.
said we weren't getting Christmas presents because I had a kid. And the kid was going to get the Christmas presents, and then she bought it. And I was like, oh my God, I love it. I mean, I had it for like 20 years, you know, in the corner. So it's even sometimes there's not a physical thing attached to it. And what rises is like things like that, which is the same, really. So.
Well, Pam, your dad and my dad were together on the lake. Remember, it was about a year ago. Yesterday, he died a year ago yesterday. So,
Oh, I'm
my
sorry.
and we were on Zoom the day after. Do you remember? And I was like, oh, I'm having a horrible time. Anyway, and he was on the lake with Pam's dad. And so we have more in common now. We both have red boats in our past.
We do, and ironically, I'm at the lake.
Oh, well, I'm not, but I was there last week.
I can't believe that's been a
Wait.
year since your dad's been gone.
No, July 19th, he
Wow.
passed away. So,
Oh
yeah,
my God.
whole year.
That's
It's
crazy.
like, where did it go?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I thought about, I think, Nikki, were you talking about someone in heaven and you were asking what they were doing now, or maybe it was a session you had and their mom had passed and she was traveling, she's doing all this stuff. And the daughter was like, that doesn't make sense because she always hated, you know, was afraid of traveling or something. And anyhow, I thought to myself, I wonder what my dad's doing now.
Oh yeah, that was part of the video actually.
Yes,
That
it
was
was in
this
the
month
video.
in the video. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I thought about that. I thought, well, that's a great question. I never thought to think about, you know, asking or wondering, you know, what our loved ones are doing. You know, what are you doing?
Yeah, they do a lot. They do a lot of different they do a lot of stuff over there.
Yeah,
So
very interesting.
very good. That's a good question. If he pops in and gives me an answer, I will let you know.
Oh, yeah. I wasn't necessarily asking. He's not a big talker, so he would
Yeah.
probably be polite and not do that. But if he does,
Mhm. Does anybody else want to share what they would put in their slot? No? Okay. So I thought when I was thinking about what we could talk about, and it feels like it's a repeat, like maybe we talked about this before, but then a couple people I asked said, no, we didn't talk about this before. But I wanted to ask everybody, what was the life lesson that you learned the hard way? And why was it hard to learn it, and how did it benefit you? And like, have you taught it to other people? Have you tried to convey that to other people? So it was your life lesson, and then you used it to help somebody else grow in that way. So does anybody want to start, or should I start?
well,
I'll start.
I have.
Okay, you go ahead and start, Sue.
Oh, it was me. Okay. So
Yep.
when you said that in the video, I thought, not that question again. I hate that question. I got nothing.
Did I do this? Did we talk about this?
No,
before?
but I mean, other places that I've been to, other conferences, they always, you know, what is your
Okay.
biggest life lesson, whatever, you know. And so I remember thinking, I got nothing. But today I was with my niece Julie, and she's had a rough upbringing, right? I mean, she's had she has a very low self-esteem, right? And so in her childhood, she was put down a lot, I should say. Oh, you're fat, you're this, you're that, right? So she's really, really hard on herself. And one of the things that I always thought years ago was,
Your dad is sitting by the lake fishing because he just came and put his hand on your shoulder and he's like, I'm sitting by the lake fishing, but he's not. He's in like one of those, it's a sitting down chair. He's not on a boat. He's
like
like on a
pontoon.
lawn chair.
He's on a lawn
No,
chair.
he's not on a boat. He's on a lawn chair on a pier, on a lawn chair.
Okay, yeah.
So it's a white lawn chair with blue lines on it, like that straw kind of
Yep.
type. And so that's all he's doing. So if you're curious, that's his paradise.
Thank you,
Okay,
Papa.
So go ahead with your story. I'm sorry.
So Julie and I I was taking her shopping, and we were talking a lot, and she took a call, and I overhear her going, "Oh no, really, that's you, I don't deserve that," and blah blah blah. And then she gets off and explains to me, and it's all like self-negative talk. And I told her, I said, she doesn't feel worthy. She always feels like she has bad luck, right? And she's not worthy of things, and especially other people's kindness. And I told her, I said, Julie, if you talked to me the way you talk to yourself, I would not be your friend. And she was like, I said, think about that. And I said, you need to change that narrative that you're telling yourself. And then we talked about, oh, well, yeah, when I was growing up, my dad was always negative and blah, 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 and that kind of stuff. And I remember, so here's my life lesson. I always thought I was, confident and strong and independent and blah, blah, blah. But when I was in probably my early 30s or mid 30s, I had a job. I was at this company a long time, and I had several different jobs. And then I was promoted to materials manager. And I took over for a woman who quit because the VP was a real jerk, right? And I thought, you know what? I can rise above this guy, right? Well, after a year, I couldn't. The guy lied, and he would tell me one thing, and then he'd say, no, I didn't. And he would always make me be and anyhow, it got to me. And the lesson that I learned, it was like in human nature, if we're well, maybe it's not a lesson I learned, but it's something I discovered, that if we are told we're stupid long enough, or whatever, you're crazy, whatever it is, if we're put down long enough, after a while, we start to actually believe it and internalize it and behave that way. And then, I pulled a Nikki. I was like, back to Julie. I said, I don't know how you change that narrative, but you got to change it. And this is the Nikki part. You got to rewrite the ending of that story. Do you remember when you said that, Nikki? You had to like an add-on. I didn't really go into detail, but this is what her life is. And I know this to be true because it happened to me for a while. Well, actually, I was smart enough to quit that job. And it took me a little while to gain my self-confidence back again. But so I don't know, what is the life lesson on that? But that's as close as I can come to a life lesson that I can think of right now, is trying to help my niece Julie.
That if you negative self-talk so much, you start to believe it about yourself and incorporate it into your life. And then that becomes your life.
Yes, she heard it growing up, but now she's the one that's continuing it, to herself,
Right.
But yeah, so if you're exposed to something long enough, we start to believe it and internalize it and live that way. And somehow, maybe with Nikki's advice, we got to figure out how to, add on to that story and rewrite that ending and move on from there. So I don't know.
I think therefore I am. What do you mean, Britt?
I've heard it a bunch before, and I just Googled it. It's from this philosopher named Rene Descartes. And it was something that he wrote about, like, your thoughts becoming your identity. So he would say, I think, therefore I am. And you can read that a bunch of different ways, like anything philosophical, right? So you can say, I think, therefore I exist. So things that don't think must not exist. Or it can be talking about identity. But when you were talking, Sue, it just reminded me of, like, if you think something, it becomes integral to who you believe yourself to be. So if you think you're a piece of shit, eventually you will feel like a piece of shit and you will act like a piece of shit. But if you think that you are capable, that you are strong, that you are independent, all the things that you thought about yourself, Sue, growing up, then what did you become? Capable, independent, and strong. Your niece didn't have that same upbringing, that same idea. So those thoughts that she thought through her life became who she was in the world. So maybe the first step to that is to change how you think about yourself, even if you don't believe it at first. Maybe you just say it as an affirmation until it becomes true enough that you do believe it. And then you start to live what you believe, and you think, therefore you are.
And you fake it till you
But
make
in turn too, if that's the case, then how do you, even if you repeat it to yourself, your positive affirmations, and it does become an integral part of who you are, but you still have to incorporate the physical aspect of that, because that's a thought and that's an emotion. So it means that you have to take action on it. So you would have to set up small measurements or small goals for yourself so that you can learn to trust yourself. So in my example, it was, I promised myself I would make my bed for 7 days. The first week I did it for 3 days. And then the baby puked on me and I said, forget it. And I chucked it. And then the next week I tried again. I made it 4 days, but it took me 3 weeks to make my bed for 7 days in a row. It only takes me 30 seconds because I don't have a top sheet. I just have a comforter. Like, that's all I have to do. It's literally 20 seconds. But I had to make sure I could live up to my own promises to myself. And that's how you shift the negative self-talk, because you set up small goals for yourself, little promises to yourself that you can accomplish. And even if it feels like it's really, really little, you just have to start there, whatever you really think you can do. And if it's only like 5 jump ropes a day, then that's all it is 5 jump ropes a day, nothing else. And then reach that and achieve that so that you can start to trust yourself. And that eliminates the negative self-talk because you're paying attention to that guidance for yourself. So that's how you get out of that. Does that make sense? So true.
I always like to think of it like, imagine it's a radio station and you're focused only on one frequency, right? So I don't know a ton of radio stations. So like, I'll go back to my kid years of like, if you were only listening to B96, that's all you heard, right? But if you turn the dial to 97.1, there's all new music, all new things, as your reality is no longer B96, it's 97.1. So what happens is if you become, if like you had said, Sue, right, you hear it enough, that becomes the lens that you see the whole world. So if I'm a victim in every situation, like I was at Jewel and a guy, I heard him say, oh, it's not fair. On all the warm days, I have to be inside, and all the cold days, they make me go inside. And I knew the lens that he saw the world was from injustice, that nothing is fair. So instead of thinking like, hey, maybe you're prone to having heart attacks, maybe like universe is bringing you inside on hot days to not like overwork your heart or whatever, right? But if it's the lens that you see the world, you put a story on it, which that story has meaning, which then there's a feeling, and I will always try to avoid the feeling. So if my feeling is, I don't ever want to be misunderstood or I don't want to be judged, I will always try to do anything to avoid that feeling. And then what happens is I'm actually attached because I won't let go because I'm so afraid. It's like I'm running on a treadmill from the feeling, but when I stop the treadmill, it's always going to be there. You know, so
Sure.
you have to make small, minute changes, right? Like over time, like you're saying, that it doesn't feel like you're actually making any changes. But when you look back, everything is different. But everyone wants the lotto win change. Everyone wants the knight on the white horse to come in to save. But the whole thing is, you are your only savior. No one, it's like when somebody does Reiki and they're like, I healed your root chakra. It's like, no, I didn't. That's your job. You know, it's our job to heal, but it's luckily we have these opportunities, right? Like you're saying, of to learn these things.
Well, like, and I believe in all of the Reiki and the massage and the energy work. But what I have found is that, we have 5 different bodies of existence. So we have a physical, a mental, emotional, a transition, and a bliss body. So when they're sending energy through you to your physical body, you can kind of think of it like you went to the doctor, he put a Band-Aid on it. But that's all he did was put a Band-Aid on it. If you don't take care of the wound, it's going to come back and you have to go back then for more energy work and for more of that. So the idea is that, yeah, you are your own savior. And if you even look at like Jesus, for example, he said, the kingdom of God is within. So that's what he's teaching us. Like, go within. There's where your savior is, because that's where the kingdom of God is. So what is that? That's the part of you that doesn't change. It's the part of you that exists always. It's the part of you that actually fills your slot in heaven, right? That's your soul that brings that information to you. So I find that that's a really great, yeah. Thank you, Hayumi. Is there another one, or that's
uh, for me, are you talking about?
yes. I didn't know if you were responding to her or if that was your
Oh.
life lesson you were sharing.
Oh, I was just responding to that. If
I thought so.
the life lesson that I had just wrote down was that took probably, that's judgmental, took the right amount of time to learn, was that nothing is personal. That anything anyone says is simply a reflection of every single situation they've ever been through that have created their lens of the world. And it's not about me. It's about how they see it. And I guess how I work with that is just with clients, of being able to see things that it isn't so personal. Everything that people say isn't about you, right? If you're in the car, not everyone is staring at you. It's not about you all the time.
What I find really interesting is when I was asking myself a question that I asked you guys about, what is the life lesson that I learned the hard way? And why was it the hard way? I was working in a partner firm and I was working on a contract, and I found that the work that we were doing for the client wasn't going to serve them in 6 months. So I told the partner about it. And the partner's like, too bad, so sad. We're not telling them. That's their job. Their technical people have to figure that out. That's not on me. We're going to deliver the project. And it went so in contradiction to my belief. Like, it went against my principles because of that decision. So I quit my job. Like, I just quit. I was like, I quit that day because I couldn't believe they were going to screw over a client. Okay. And then I'm the one sitting there with no job later. So like, I really jumped to this conclusion and I did that. I got a job really quickly. I ended up going back to a previous company I worked for. But about 10 years later, and this is how long this lesson took to like click in my brain. But about 10 years later, I realized that, wow, they had to fulfill a contract. We got specifications from their company. And they paid. It is their person's, but if they didn't fulfill the contract, they would get sued. So like, they didn't have a choice. They had to fulfill the contract, the partner. And I realized that, wow, the only thing that I saw was my own view. Like 10 years later, I mean, I was like 25, but like 10 years later, I realized, oh my God, I didn't even, now I get it. Like, it took that long. And so since then, I really do try to see things from another person's perspective and what is their experience of the exact same situation. My experience of this situation is one thing, but your experience of this is a completely different way. And so I got to try to figure out, what is your experience? And I think that we do that naturally. Like, think of when you're going to have a party at your house. You ask everybody, oh, what do you like to drink? What do you like to drink? What do you like to drink? You like to like give people what you think they might like.
Mhm.
So it's just, Oh yeah, we dropped a gate. So it's just it's if you can see things from other people's perspective, your your range of perception grows, and the more you do that, the less you see it from your contained lens. Like the more you make the effort to see what would somebody else think about this experience, like what is your experience, then your experience is no longer the lens you're looking through. You see what I mean? Yeah, you see what I mean. So,
Can I, like,
so that was, I was gonna like share the same thing basically. Yeah.
this would be like an example, right? So like, this is a pink notebook. This is a pink notebook, right?
Well, to me, it looks white.
Okay. Well, so to you guys, it may look white, but for me, it is a pink notebook.
Mhm.
So in life, we can't always see what the other person is seeing, right?
Mhm.
That like what you're talking about is you have to understand the other perspective because it may actually make sense to the other person because it's from what they see, what they feel. But from your vantage point, you may only see a white notebook.
But you know, Haley, I was gonna say something similar because it, you know, the biggest struggle I've had, I think, through life was really taking everything personal. It's all about me. And it has nothing to do with me. And I always thought it has something to do with me. But then I actually figured it out and I divided it. I struggle sometimes with it personally. From a business perspective, I have an easier time separating. Right? I realized the lesson that in business, this isn't about me. This is a circumstance. This is not saying I may be getting yelled at, but I'm not getting yelled at as to who the individual I am, maybe the job I did, but it's not about me personally as an individual. Right? And so what I tried to do then when I was managing people is I would tell them, even if I was frustrated about a circumstance, I tell them, you realize this is not about you, the person. This is about the decision you made to do this, this, and this, or this is broken and we have to fix this. It's about the circumstance, not who you are, to try to make sure they knew it wasn't about them, because I always felt like it was about me. And so that's the piece, though. It seems like it's easier to do that with work than it is personally. And I catch myself personally falling back into that at times. So I have not mastered that.
Typically, when the reason that it's easier to do that in the outside world as opposed to doing it personally in your own personal experience is because you have expectations of the people and dependencies on the people that you're connected to in your circle. So that's why things become a struggle, is because maybe you haven't identified the dependencies that you have on them, because that's what's actually getting triggered. So if I have a dependency on you that you are always going to welcome and accept me, but then one day you don't because you're busy or you have company or something like that, am I going to take that against me? And you'll feel, if your dependency on me has something like that, then you will feel that sense. That's what'll get triggered in you. So one of the things that I've tried to do is figure out in my relationships, what are those dependencies that I have on people, so that if I have this dependency, I have an expectation. And what if they don't show up? Then I'm going to trigger like my worst feeling in the world. So what are they? So if you go through the relationships that you have, you just simply kind of try to reach that core connection of intimacy with that person. And you do that by just asking yourself, you know, what's the first memory of that person that pops into my head from early on in our relationship? Like, what is that memory? And so when you get that memory, when your soul brings you that thought, now you know this is your expectation on this person. And the more that this person fulfills that expectation, you start to gather a dependency on that person. And then you start to behave in the relationship according to the expectation and the dependency, as opposed to the natural gift of what that person really has to offer. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So think of like somebody, I don't know, think of some, you can use me as an example, or You can use each other. Oh, sorry. It's okay. That's okay. They're okay. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that we have dogs.
We can barely hear them.
You guys
Not
can't
loud.
hear them barking right now?
Very minimal.
Oh, maybe. Oh, maybe they can't really hear them. They said it's very minimal. But so, so for example, if you think of me, what is your first memory of me that pops into your head? Whatever that memory is, it will define what your connection is to me. It will define what you expect of me, or what, you know, and if you don't get what you expect of me, you might take that personally, even if it's not intended to be personal, you see? So everybody has this core connection with people, and that core connection is what the relationship thrives from, but it's also what can decimate it at the same time if you don't recognize what that is. Would anybody like to give an example? No.
I was waiting for Britt. You jump in on those, Britt.
Well, okay, so I have one, but you'll have to kind of work through it with me to figure out like
Okay.
if we've actually dismantled the dependency or not. So
Okay.
my first memory that comes up when I think of you, one of the first ones, is when I was little and I told you.
Am I going to go under the bus right now? No, I'm kidding.
No,
Go ahead.
no, you're not going to go under the bus. No, this was when.
Should I hold my breath? No.
So for everybody else,
Okay.
Marissa and I have two dads. Mom was married before when she was in the military, and that guy, his name is Wayne. He kind of took off. He didn't want to be a dad. And it was one of my birthdays or some party or something. And I remember I was really little. I was probably like 3 or 4. And I was jumping on the couch and I was telling my mom, Daddy's coming to my party. Daddy's coming to my party. And she's like, I'm sorry, honey, I don't think he's going to come. And I was like, well, you're wrong. And she was right. And that set this core expectation that my mom was always right. And
Which I am, but it's okay.
so I had this core expectation and this dependency that she was always going to be right. And that created this dynamic in our relationship where I was constantly trying to break it. I was constantly bringing her information and being like, haha, what do you think? And then she would be like, well, this is what happens. And I'm like, well, you're right. And I don't know if I've been able to break it or if I've been able to determine what my own right is, or if I've been able to just expand my understanding of the world to like take into account the nuance that you were talking about before, and that has come up, right? We don't know what another person sees. So maybe objectively what you're saying is right, but maybe objectively there are other facets to the story, because I feel like I really value your perspective and I really value what you have to say, and I hold it in very high regard, but I don't think I hang my hat on it the way I used to. I don't think I like live and die by what you say anymore. And I used to, like, very strongly, but I think I've realigned that compass to be more what I believe to be true, which is the point, right? Is that you're supposed to go by what your own spirit says, by what your own soul says. And there's obviously like an objective right or wrong. And you are so much more experienced, like just in life stuff. So like for like life stuff, 99.99999% of the time you are right and I am wrong. But I don't know. That's the thing that comes up for me. So maybe let's pull that thread a little. What do you think?
So, you know, I remember when I learned about this concept, and I don't remember how it came to me, but I know it was in my journey and my spirit stuff. But when I realized that about myself, I asked you and Marissa, hey, what's your first memory of me? Because I wanted to see if this theory that I had discovered in my journey is actually a true thing. And you told me about that at the time. And you said that there was she can go up, that there was when you were jumping on the couch and I told you don't jump on the couch, you're going to hurt yourself, and you did, but you didn't tell me that you hurt your arm. And that your dad was coming to the party, and I knew he wasn't, and he was in Florida, and he told you he was coming the same day, and I was like, he doesn't even have a flight, like he's not coming. And so when you told me that was your first memory, and I don't remember how old you were when we actually talked about that, but I do remember that a lot of your childhood started to flash in my brain. And one of the things that you did was, I was at work and you called me at work and you said, hey, they put this announcement out about playing basketball and it's a co-ed team and I want to play. And I'm like, oh, I don't know if you'll like that, Britt. And you're like, yeah, I didn't think I would like it. And I go, yeah, that's true. And then a little while later, I was like, maybe you would really like it. And you go, yeah, that's what I was thinking. I think I would really love it. And I said, yeah, me too. And so you joined it. And so there were different experiences like that I felt like you were like, I was the testing board. And then you would allow yourself to think something or not. And you must have been like, maybe you were 16 when we had this conversation, because a few months later, and we talked about it, and I told you, you have to just check with yourself. Like, is it right for you? And we talked about it. And then I intentionally one time gave you bad information, because you had to recognize that you had to pick who were you going to listen to, me or you. But I didn't want you to go off to college and trust me more than you trust yourself, right? And so I did that. And I think that's the moment that you started to, not that you didn't listen to my opinions, but you had your own. And you kind of used mine as a challenge to yours, but it did kind of reset you in a way that you can trust your own inner guidance. Like, that was the goal, right? So that you didn't default to me. So that was your dependency, because that was your first core connection with me. And then we all have core connections with our children. So we have it with every single person that we have in our circle, people that we meet. And you could know them for 5 years, but then the moment of impact, the thing that your soul brings to you when you think about them could have been like year number 3. It's not necessarily your earliest experience. It's just that when you ask yourself about that person, that thought comes to your mind, or that memory comes to your mind. And that's where that connection is developed.
What was yours for me?
That you make things better for me. And you did. And then I realized that, and remember, we had to put a chore chart up so I didn't take advantage of you. We had a chore chart on the refrigerator, but it wasn't for me, or it wasn't for her. It was because her chores were straighten the shoes, take out the garbage can, and put your school stuff away. Like, those were the chores. But then I would just ask her to do everything for me. So when I realized that I was like taking advantage of her core connection, I had put a chore chart on the refrigerator so that anything she did outside of her chores was like a gift to me. Not that I was like taking advantage of her always making things better for me. So I like kept trying to keep myself in check.
Right, because
so yeah.
I'm always going to think you're right. And you're always going to think I make things better. So if you're like, you make it better,
Right.
Would you get me a soda? I'm like, yes, of course. And I would just do it. And I would hop too. Totally.
Right. So I had to learning what that was for her, what that memory was for her, and what my memory is of her helps me to create a relationship where that didn't feel heavy. So I always tell her, like, don't do it if you don't want to do it. Like, I'm totally fine. Like, I can handle it. Like, it's totally fine. And if she can't, she can't. And if she can, she always does. So I think that we work on that, but we have that awareness of each other. So when the relationship feels like it's struggling, those are the areas that it will be struggling with. Either me thinking I am right and trying to convince her to my point, or her trying to, figure it out in her brain where that's my role, right? and me not taking advantage of her willingness to always jump in and rescue the day. So I think that when we know that about the people that we're in a relationship with, we know how to really elevate them a lot. One of the interesting things is like Marissa's first memory of me is we were laughing about candlelight on the ceiling because I asked her, she said, it looks like a face. And I said, was it talking to you? And it was really funny. Oh, I'm going to start cracking up. But we must have laughed for like 45 minutes. So when I asked her, what's your first memory of me? She said it was that, where we laughed for like 45 minutes. Well, my first memory of her is when she was like 3 months old. She had this belly laugh, like she could sing that ranchero ha 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 kind of music. I was like, listen to her belly laugh, like she can sing cumbia, you know? And so I was like, that was my first impression of her, is this belly laugh that she had. So we have a very similar dependency on each other and core connection of intimacy with one another. And she went through all these years of crap. I mean, crap, with everything that happened with her leg and her tumor and all of that. It's just never ending, right? But we laughed through the entire thing. Like, we literally laughed through the entire thing. I mean, we cried, don't get me wrong. It was hard, it was difficult, but something about our connection allowed us to get through that with joyfulness, even though it was difficult. And so that was really how we united those core connections. So sometimes when we know that, we know how to fill in the gap for the person. And we give that gift because we love, right? And that's important. So otherwise we start to like expect it in a way that we can't even define, but nothing they do is going to make us happy. You know, if you ever heard anybody tell you, it doesn't matter what I do, you're not happy. It doesn't matter what I say, you're not happy. Well, that's what that's connected to, you see? So, makes sense? Brittany, you look perplexed.
Now I'm just trying to think about all of my memories of everybody with like all the things. And like everything, like what's when I think of each of the people, the key people in my life, like what's the first thing that pops up, and like how can I interrogate that a little bit and figure out what that means.
Yeah.
I don't mean to redirect, but it looks like Linda's cross is like shining down on her. Look at
It does. In the picture, it does look like you're like in a shroud. It looks like your tattoo, Linda. It looks like, oh, the light of God. I love it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Cool. So I'm supposed to probably think of something here, but does anybody else want to share a life lesson or comment on what we're talking about? I think it's really good prompting conversation, but think of the people in your life. And, you know, some of the time we think of, you know, like for example, the first memory, my mom is in heaven, to preface this. But the first memory of my mom that pops into my head is when I was actually 16 years old. And I crashed. I didn't live with my parents. And I had my Aunt Linda's car. And I crashed her car on the highway. And this guy picked me up and he drove me to my parents' house. And I go into my mom's house and I am freaking out and I'm crying. And I'm like, oh my God, I totaled Auntie Linda's car. Like, oh my God. And now, mind you, I lived with my Auntie Linda. I did not live with my mom, but the guy, it was closer to my mom's house. So this guy on the highway like dropped me at my mom's house. And when I walked in, she was sitting on the couch in the living room, and she just went like this. And I went over there and I put my head on her lap and she just started rubbing my hair and she's like, it'll be okay, honey. And that memory that popped into my head when I did this, like, what's my core connection of intimacy with my mom, was like, even though I don't live there with her, like she'll show up every time I need her. Like, I don't have to be with her every day. I don't have to talk to her every day. I don't have to see her or live with her every day. if I need my mom, she's there. And so even after she went to heaven, I believe that to be my core connection with her. And that's imprinted in my soul. That's the memory that my soul gave to me when I asked about that, which tells me that even though she's not here every day, even though she's not in the body anymore, that core connection of intimacy is still true. And when I need her, she shows up. Marissa and I did a little session before her last biopsy. And in the session, she came and told Marissa, like, oh, I'm not going to see you Thursday, but she did see us Thursday. But basically, that was to give us another message. But she showed up right at the time that I would need my mom to show up because of what Marissa was going through. And so she checked in. And that validates my core connection of intimacy, right? And sometimes even with people in heaven, if we have a negative core connection of intimacy and it was a challenge, they were a challenge to us, you know. And you'll find that when you're looking for the impact of the soul, even if the memory is negative, it still feels like a gift because you learned something in that connection. And so think of that too with your friends and family in heaven, and try, you know, that's an impact of the soul. That's the soul to soul connection, the core connection. So even if somebody's not present with you, try that out. See what that is. Ask them to show you that. You'll find that they'll still participate in that. They'll still participate. So I know that we are at our time today. Oh, it's 7 or it's what time? Oh, we have a couple minutes. I was supposed to end a little bit early today because we have some dinner plans with some of our friends that are out of town. But since I just have a couple minutes, I'll go like just a couple more minutes. But I think that is, you'll be surprised when you ask yourself about this. Like, I remember, you know, when I think of my grandma, the first thing I remember is her teaching me how to sew. And my whole life, my grandma taught me everything. Like, it's everything I know. It's my grandma. And so that's like the core of who I am. And I'll tell you, on this whole spiritual journey, my grandma shows up all the time and helps me out and gives me answers and teaches me stuff. So she's still fulfilling the core connection with her, even from heaven. She's still part of those lessons. So that's something to take a look at too. And you'll discover a lot about the relationships that you have with everybody in your life. You'll start to recognize what drives that relationship, and knowing that that's part of what was developed early on in the relationship. So it's a really good exercise. Maybe we'll talk about that more.
Yeah. Started to touch on what if that first memory is negative, because that's what I've been thinking all the time. And I'm thinking of these people and I'm like, well, it was negative. It was negative. So are you asking us to find a memory or think of the first time that wasn't negative?
I'll give you an example. There is this lady that lives down the street. Our daughters grew up together. And I always liked her and liked her daughters, and it was just a nice relationship, and the kids would play. And then they did this like sticker thing, you know, and where you know, your kid gets stickers in the mail, and then you send out 6 stickers to different kids, and then those kids send out 6 stickers. And at the end of the time, your kid gets like 186 stickers. Okay. So I added her daughters to the list, and I sent them, you know, their stickers. Well, I'm coming home and she stops me, and this is supposed to be a very Catholic Christian woman. She stops me and read me the riot act and told me what a horrible mother I am and what kind of person would do this kind of chain letter thing. I mean, she just read me the riot act. And so when I think of my core connection, even though I knew her for 4 years before this experience, when I ask what's my core connection, like that, don't judge a book by its cover. That was my lesson. I thought she was such a good, humble Christian, wonderful, giving. That's who she portrayed herself to be. And I was fooled. And that experience taught me a lesson, like, Don't judge a book by its cover. It's not always what it looks like. Go deeper. And that stuck with me, and that was a huge life lesson. So when you think about what if it's negative, negative core connections are for your benefit to teach you something so valuable about the rest of your life. Right? So,
Okay.
okay. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining today. This was lovely. I appreciate you. And Marissa, welcome to our Zoom. I hope that we see you again. And yeah, thank you everybody for coming. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Nice seeing everyone.